to understand what's going to happen is policy will be driven not so much by the debt and deficit numbers, it'll be driven by the unemployment numbers. And we saw the Finance Minister, Matthias Cormann, say last week, I think quite correctly, well, what alternative did we have? And that's going to be the ongoing mantra from the government. It's going to give priority to more financial measures to tackle the unemployment situation, and I believe that's the correct judgment.
And Paul, in that context then, what should we expect in the budget in October? Will there be a big ticket reform agenda?
Well, there will be a reform agenda, Kieran. Now, how big it is another question. The government's thinking at the moment is that the October budget will bring forward the next stage in the personal income tax cuts, which have already been legislated, that it will announce ongoing incentives for business investment. This is absolutely critical. I mean, business investment is incredibly weak at the moment, so the budget will address that issue and it will have further financial support. I mean, we know that JobKeeper will be extending through to March, and we know that there will be a higher rate for JobSeeker compared to the pre-virus rate. But the point to make about this is that I think that the government's earlier comparisons that it would match the reform agenda of the Hawke-Keating period, I think that was a mistaken analogy. It's a different situation now. The government's got to get its measures through the Senate, and it's clearly working on a collaboration strategy with stakeholders and with the states. So I don't think that we're going to see a reform agenda that matches the Hawke-Keating period. Finally, I'd say the immediate test, of course, is going to be the industrial relations changes, because when the government introduces the legislation to extend JobKeeper to next March, that legislation will contain within it ongoing temporary industrial relations changes, giving employers flexibility when it comes to work hours. Now, this is opposed by the ACTU, and it's going to be a fundamental test of where the country is and where the political system is. Are we prepared to make further concessions to create jobs, or is the political system going to say, no, we're going to revert to old-fashioned politics? That's going to be the big test of the country.
And Paul, if we conclude where we began in a way on Victoria, Daniel Andrews, his leadership, his government is under immense pressure right now.
It certainly is. The Morrison government is profoundly concerned about what's happening in Victoria. It's putting more ADF resources into Victoria. But the extraordinary feature about this is that the Victorian government continues to make mistake after mistake. And it's very clear that their tracing measures have been inadequate for a long period of time. We know from what the Premier's told us that people having been tested both before and after the tests are not properly self-isolating. We also know, incredibly, that a number of people who have the virus are not cooperating with authorities. So the Victorians are on the horns here of a terrible dilemma about the way they continue to manage this. One of the big questions will be whether the situation is starting to stabilise on those most recent figures over the past 2 or 3 days, and whether this 6-week lockdown on the measures announced so far will continue to work. I'd highlight the point that the Treasurer Josh Frydenberg made it very clear this week that the Morrison government opposes an elimination strategy, that it believes in a suppression strategy. And while no one is talking about an elimination strategy across the nation, Frydenberg did point out that if you had that for 6 weeks, it would cripple the Australian economy and cost $50 billion. The debate at the moment is about Victoria, and everything hinges upon Daniel Andrews being able to get this right eventually.